You know, there's nothing like a really good, solid, powerful backswing to get your golf game going in the right direction. And right after this, I'm going to talk about my 4 keys to developing one. Hey, this is Steve with HitItLonger.com, and today we're talking about my top 4 ways of developing a really good backswing. If you can get to the top pretty good, for a lot of golfers, everything is pretty much autopilot from there. Yeah, there's a few things you can mess up on the downswing, but for a lot of people, it's just, they feel like they get to the top pretty good and they feel like it's just cruising down from there and they're gonna be really successful. I feel like 2 of the keys that help me make a really good backswing start even before I take the club back. And that is, number 1, I set up over it, then I set my right side under, I pick the club up above, and I waggle it. So what I feel like I get out of my waggle is, number 1, it keeps my, I don't have to overcome inertia when I start the club, so it automatically feels like I'm going to start it back smoother. Doesn't allow me to get stiff and stand over the ball too long. You will never really see me in a swing pause for more than like a half a second to a second. I'm pretty much always in motion starting from that waggle. So you'll see I'll do left side measurement, drop the right side under, and then I waggle. The other thing it's doing for me is it's giving me a little preview of not only the way I want my wrist to take the club back, but kind of also the arc that I want to develop on my way back too. So I'm getting not only this relaxation feel, but also a little sneak preview of what I'm about to do. You know, if you go back and you study some of the greatest, you know, Hogan's probably the best example. He had a whole chapter in his 5 lessons book, I think, just dedicated to the waggle. It seemed like he really emphasized the waggle. Snead really talked about it too, and you know, Nicklaus waggled it as well. So most every good player has some kind of waggle in the swing to set them up for a smooth backswing. And it's something you really should develop as well. So I'm lifting and waggling, okay? Lift, waggle. So the waggle itself is just simply a very supple, pliable wrist break this way. What I'm doing here is I'm breaking just simply breaking my right wrist into dorsiflexion, and I'm breaking my left wrist into palmar flexion. So it's just that. There isn't any turning of the arm bones. It's just this move back and forth. Basically, I'm going this way and this way a little. So that's it. I'm not turning the club off if it's arc or anything. Just a small move like that. And the suppleness is just incredible when I do that. I just feel like my arms are going to fall off. Okay, so my second step or tip on how to make a really good backswing is going to also be before I take it back, and it's highly related to the waggle, and it's a move that we call the forward press. So as I set up, see, I'm dancing with my feet, I'm never coming to rest, bouncing, still moving, under, lift, waggle, set it down, and. See, I call that my and move. In my tempo, that's my and, like the conductor would, he'd lift up like this, and go. So that's my little breathe, my little pause right before I pull the trigger. Let's examine the details that I'm using for the forward press. So the forward press has three little parts to it. They're so incredibly supple that no one should really be able to detect what you're doing unless they're really looking at you. You shouldn't make them that obvious. They are just to continue on the same vein as tip one, where you're just trying to keep yourself moving, not coming to a standstill. So the forward press will be, number one, I'm going to take my left hip and I'm going to bump it 1 inch targetward. Bump. Okay, number two, I'm going to take this right knee and I'm going to flex it towards the center, towards the ball. See how small that is, barely detectable. Then number three, all at the same time, I'm going to be flattening out this wrist. So I'm going to lean the handle towards the target about 1 inch, just simply by taking the little bit of dorsiflexion out of my wrist into a neutral. So just like that. All at once, these three things happen, and it should be very fluid. And again, it's just to help trigger a smooth backswing. Okay, so on to my third tip for making a perfect backswing is making a smooth takeaway. So now we're actually going to be moving the club back. We've gone waggle, forward press, and now the takeaway. The key to this, to me, is to not use my wrist or arms until I get the handle of the club to my thigh or my hip. So my pivot is going to be governing this. I'll show you just with my left arm on the club only. Right to there. So position one right there, as I go back, you see all I've done is started to pivot, and my torso has responded to that by starting to wind. Let me show you from this angle now. Okay, there I am under. Now here I am just starting. You're going to see my arm and wrist simply do not move. I'm moving all the big muscles of my legs, my trunk, my torso. The hips are tilting, turning. My chest and shoulders are responding freely to that by winding on this specific axis. That helps me bring the club back low and on an arc, exactly what we'll need to have a good swing plane. To me, we get in trouble when the body isn't used for the majority of the impetus to get the club going back, or maybe it is moving, but it's not moving on this plane. You might get a golfer who might go corkscrewing more, and that would want to make the club tend to suck inside unless they independently use their arms. So this way I can get the club winding onto the proper plane. I can do it smoothly because I'm not jerking it with my hands and arms, and I get all the big muscles of my body involved early to get a better wind-up. When we're talking about developing a really good backswing, is a couple of checkpoints to make sure you're going in the right direction. The first checkpoint is what we might call first parallel. When the club gets to parallel to the ground the first time, here comes my forward press. I start to wind. Now, right about here, when the club is even with my middle thigh, this is where I feel like I'm going to start to exert a force with my wrists. You see, and I'm going to start getting the wrist to cock. This brings me to first parallel, where you can see that the number one, the club shaft, is pointing down my intended line of flight, or parallel to it anyway. And you can see that the toe of the club is on this side of the shaft, rather than being on, let's say, this side of the shaft. So I'm keeping it something like that. That's our first checkpoint. Now, as we continue to draw the club up towards the top of the swing, the second checkpoint is going to be parallel to this, except another 180 degrees. So we want to get the club, again, parallel to the flight line as it's parallel to the ground. And you see, I don't quite have a classic 45-degree head here because my wrist is just a little bit flat, or even a little bit in a bow that way. So you're going to see my club face might tend to be a little bit more skyward. Similar, but not as extreme as what you might see in Dustin Johnson's swing. Let me see if I can show you here. So waggle, forward press, big muscles, wrist cocks to first parallel, then I'm winding up. Okay, see I've got flat left wrists, or even a bit bowed, and the club is pointing at my intended line of flight, parallel to the ground. Now, if you were going to go for a little bit more, maybe a par 5 swing, you could allow the club to dip below parallel just a bit more, simply by winding up the shoulders and the trunk a bit more, get a little bit more aggressive at the top of the swing, but nevertheless staying just as wide. So if you're going to go for a little bit more, don't do it by getting longer but then collapsing the arc. That will kind of the whole purpose. Okay, there you have it. Hopefully you can use these 4 ideas: the waggle, forward press, smooth takeaway with the big muscles, and then the checkpoints to make sure that you're reasonably on plane. You don't have to do any of these 4 things absolutely perfectly to get good results, but you want to keep improving on them. Hey, if you have any questions, I answer most of them down in the comments, so go ahead and leave a comment down below. If you got some help out of this video, feel free to give it a like, and go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll get notification when I come out with another video. I hope to see you again watching some of my other videos, or maybe in person, long and straight down the fairway.